Thank you so much. I am so proud to see a constituent testifying here today who has dedicated his career to building a fairer, worker-centered economy. It's also very refreshing to hear from the perspective of an economist with roots in the labor movement. Dr. Sojourner, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your important research. You recently conducted a study using enforcement data on workplace violations across OSHA, WHD, and NLRP that found workers with lower wages were more likely to experience labor rights violation. Why did you choose to look at workplace violations compared with wages, and what should policymakers take away from this research?
Thank you, Representative. We looked at this because, employers have power in the labor market, and sometimes they use that power to push down wages, and sometimes they use it to violate other kinds of rights, like health and safety violations or violations of workers' rights to organize. And what we see is that when wages rise within a labor market, violations tended to decrease. So when workers have more bargaining power in the economy, they're able to push up wages and push down rights violations. But when employers have more bargaining power, they're able to extract more value from the relationship through lower wages and other kinds of changes that sometimes violate workers' rights. And so we just wanted to enrich our understanding of the economy. Too often we focus just on wages because they're easy to measure relatively, but other aspects of workers' experiences like healthy and safe jobs or right to speak out freely about working conditions are also important in their lives and in their work to try to improve their work.
And in that same study, you also found that unions were found to decrease labor rights violations. Can you tell us how unions help in protecting workers in the workplace?
Yeah, so unions are a way for workers to have an independent voice where they don't fear retaliation because they're not alone when they're speaking up about issues that they are confronting in the workplace and issues that they share with their coworkers, often involving bad management decisions or things like this. So it basically, instead of being alone, you have somebody standing beside you, and workers are more free, feel more empowered to speak up, to speak out publicly, to speak up to management, to speak up to enforcement agencies, and they have less fear of retaliation. So we can see that if we compare companies where in all the companies, the workers wanted to unionize, but in some of them, the union just lost the election compared to in other ones, the union just won the election. So there's nothing really that different. They all wanted to unionize, but some did successfully and some failed. Years later, you can see that workers in those unionized workplaces are more likely to speak up and file complaints.
Mm-hmm. I've worked in places where we had a union and places where we didn't. I could definitely see that. Dr. Sojourner, you also conducted an interesting study looking into the availability of early childhood education in Minnesota.
Yeah.
You found that the average family in Minnesota lives in a location where there are nearly 2 children for every nearby slot of licensed capacity. Can you talk a little bit about what families had lower levels of access and how this impacted them?
Yeah, thank you. And this is an important workforce issue too, in terms of especially equitable access to earnings opportunities for women and mothers and parents generally in the economy. Having access to affordable, high-quality care is a huge barrier to work and earning for a lot of them. So in Minnesota, what we found was, Minnesotans living in low-income communities had less access. Communities of color had less access, and there are moves to try to address those inequities. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
And I'm
you.
sure there's a policy recommendation for us to close that gap. So thank you so much for being here today and for your work.
Thank you.
I yield back, Chairman.